The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
This week on The Communicators, we focus on the future of television. We speak with former FCC Chairman Julius Genachowski and former FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell. That's followed by our discussion with Congressman Greg Walden, Chairman of the House Subcommittee on Communications and Technology.
We're in a landscape that's absolutely shifting, and there are areas of the statutory scheme where it would make sense to look at and say, are those keeping up with the changes in the marketplace? Fundamentally, having this kind of competition, programming innovation, access by new players to consumers, and access by the traditional players to viewers in new ways. Obviously, what's happening on tablets is amazing. What's starting to happen in the living room is very exciting. We're in just an incredible time when it comes to the delivery of video programming to consumers. There are issues. We heard it at the Commission, both of us did, from distributors who are concerned about the cost of programming. Consumers are concerned about the cost of programming. So that's an issue that I think the Commission and Congress will need to continue to look at. But I do think this is an area where the glass is half full at least, because we're seeing exciting new competition and creativity in this part of the landscape.
To use this analogy a little bit more, I would actually say the glass is overflowing and runneth over. I think there's a terrific time to be a consumer in the video market and the audio market too. And probably like the ex-chairman, I look at this market through the eyes of my kids. I have 3 young kids, and what are their consumption habits here? And they have more choices than any human beings in history in terms of what's there, and through more conduits too. So I think it's a very positive, constructive, and disruptive marketplace right now, and I think the law needs to be revised to reflect that. The FCC has really zero authority to forbear from regulation in the video realm, and I think Congress needs to help us out with that, but to or help the FCC out. I made that slip. It's only been a week, but also in all areas. So we have these stovepipes of, if you're offering services over twisted copper pair, there's one set of rules. If it's over coaxial cable, there's another set of rules. If it's over the air one way, yet another. Over the air another way, yet another. And the marketplace has converged well beyond that. These are 80-year-old concepts, and we need to move on. But Congress really needs to initiate a rewrite as soon as possible.
The video world is going through enormous change. I think a huge paradigm change right before our eyes with the 2-to-1 decision in the court on the Aereo case, where they can basically download the signal off air, put it up on the internet, and say that's okay. That has huge consequences potentially. And so you've got Aereo doing that, just a limited basis in one market, but talking about expanding. You've got satellite providers thinking, well, then we can get around retransmission here. Maybe we'll do that. You got a cable company that said, we'll look at that too. And all of a sudden, the whole business model and marketplace is getting tossed around pretty rapidly.
Well, you also mentioned the Aereo decision.
Right.
What's your view on that?
I was surprised by the decision.
Were you
really
supportive?
No,
Did you have an opinion?
Well, I'm an old radio broadcaster, so I'm not a TV guy. But I look at that and think that's a disruptor in the marketplace. Sort of like Hopper's a disruption in the marketplace, and disruptions aren't bad necessarily. But this one really has, I think, much bigger consequences as people are beginning to read into it.
Sure, and just to piggyback off that, as Aereo has progressed through the courts and folks have been reacting to it, you have others like Fox that are talking about pulling their signals just in response. How does that play on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think that's all part of the discussion because, at some point, producers of programming have to have a way to get paid, or you're going to have programming. I mean, somebody's got to pay the bill, and a lot of that's been through the various financial arrangements among the providers and the TV stations and, all of those very complicated mishmash of laws and rules and legacies and all. And if that goes away and somebody's taking your product and putting it up on cable for free, basically, then all of a sudden you probably have to look at how you change that model. And that's, I think, what Chase Carey was carefully saying at the NAB in his remarks. And, of course, it sort of lit up every switchboard in telco world. But I think he didn't say they were going to, but I think this is the point I'm making, is you've got everybody sitting back going, now wait a minute, what just happened here with Aereo? What does that mean? And does that mean I get around paying retrans fees? And what do you do if you already have contracts? And if you're the local broadcast provider, what does that mean? I mean, it's I don't think we know all the implications here. And again, everybody's like, okay, a 2-to-1 decision in one court doesn't make this formal everywhere. But.
Well, in that same NAB speech, you said you're not convinced retransmission consent needs need reforming at this time.
That's true.
Why?
Most of these agreements have been reached now. We want a marketplace that works. That's my sort of fundamental philosophy, whether it's in broadcast, cable, wireless world. I want competitive marketplaces, and I want the marketplace to work. I don't want government coming in unless the marketplace fails. And so here you have most of these retransmission consent agreements have now been signed. I think virtually all of them are, and some of them are now extended out 4 years or 8 years. And so the marketplace has worked in that respect, and I think that's a more efficient way to deal with this than to get into a rate-setting body or have the government create, who's going to get paid what for what. I mean, that to me is not agile, nor a good way to go.
What do you think of John McCain's reintroduction of the a la carte bill?
There's a lot of talk about the pros and cons of a la carte, and certainly some of the smaller cable providers like the notion. I'm not sure it's the panacea that many say or think it is, that suddenly you can just pick the shows you want, or they only have. Because remember, you still have that whole Tier 1 requirement locally, where the broadcast signals are there, and then you go above that. And so there's some, I don't know if he's talking about getting rid of that. And again, you wonder what that does to the pricing model and to the wide range programming that's out there. I mean, there is the trade-off that says with the current system, you get a lot more programming that frankly, and maybe consumers wouldn't want it, but frankly wouldn't exist otherwise, because there wouldn't be the consumer demand probably for it. And it gets bundled in and this, that, and the other thing. And so I think you have to be very careful. That would be a real interesting disruptor of the market. And some think it'll be great and work, and others say it would be a disaster and people don't know what they'd be getting into. Suddenly you're going to pay a whole bunch more for the sports programming or some other programming.
You're watching The Communicators on C-SPAN, and this week our focus is the future of television. As we continue, we'll hear from Chet Kanojia, the founder and CEO of a startup company named Aereo, followed by Gordon Smith, president of the National Association of Broadcasters. We then speak with Michael Powell, president of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association.
We think of Aereo as a really new way of thinking about how people are going to consume television in the future. It's an online platform which is direct to consumers, and people can get access today to live broadcast television along with a DVR on any device without a cable connection, just using the internet for the grand old price of $8 a month.
And this is over-the-air broadcast channels that people can get through Aereo.
That is correct.
What am I holding in my hand here?
So that's actually the key element, the foundational piece of the Aereo technology. That's a micro antenna. And think about it as how you used to have over-the-air antennas in the past. They were large. We miniaturized them through a lot of sophisticated technology. And the purpose of miniaturizing them, we can build hundreds of thousands of these things into a very small room. And by doing that, we can allow a cloud-based implementation of how consumer can capture the signal, which is really the big innovation here, because the cloud technologies allow us to lower the cost down very dramatically, lower barriers to the consumers very significantly, because suddenly you don't need boxes or cables or cords. You just go online, sign up, and you have access to it. So that's actually the antenna.
What's it made out of?
It's actually copper.
And that's all it is? Is there a chip in here? Is there anything?
No, that's just the loop, the front end of it, and there's a whole host of signal processing technology that's on a circuit board. And the equipment in its final form looks like telecommunications equipment that mounts in standard racks.
Are there cable channels that are part of Aereo's service?
So we have we're working with Bloomberg Television as a first partner in this thing, and that seems to have done really well. It sort of coincides with our view that television's evolution is going to be what I call skinny live and deep libraries. And by skinny live, I mean things that are not time sensitive can be in libraries, and in fact they are. If you go to Netflix or Amazon or any number of these online libraries, you have a tremendous amount of cable content that makes it there. And we think people want live for things that are relevant, important, unscripted. So it tends to be sports, news, large reality shows, special events, things of that nature. So as a result, we focus on news as a first category that we think we can open this platform up to and allow these consumers to have access to different things. So that's...
What's your response when broadcasters say you're stealing their signal?
You know, at some point you have to sort of call it what it is. It's name calling, because when 3 federal courts express an opinion that it is a legal technology and it's consistent with what Congress intended, it's difficult for me to sort of to look at it any other way except as name calling and mischaracterization. Fact of the matter is that this content is paid for by the consumers in advertising spectrum that the broadcasters have. And I think it's worth clarifying that Aereo technology is only applied to free-to-air television, free-to-air broadcast. It is not applied to cable content or cable channels, right? When we work with a cable channel, for example, in Bloomberg's case, you know, it's a productive partnership where we enter into a commercial relationship with them. So it's difficult for me to even answer the question, why is it stealing, when you're required to program to the consumer's interest. A consumer has a right to an antenna, and whether they buy the antenna from Radio Shack or they buy from Aereo is sort of not relevant. We've consistently established a paradigm. The length of the wire that connects your antenna to your DVR and to your television set isn't a matter of debate. You know, whether if you live on in an apartment building where you have a 50-foot wire versus a 10-foot wire, how is that any different?
I would respond just this way. It is true the Second Circuit denied a preliminary injunction against broadcasters, so the case proceeds. And that yesterday on the merits in the Ninth Circuit, a case called Aereo Killer, the Ninth Circuit District Court held that it was in fact identical facts. They held that it was a violation of copyright. So that happened yesterday. Ultimately, this will have to be decided, I suppose, by the Supreme Court. But the principle is simply this. If you want to put out our stuff and you want to grab it and charge someone for it, then there's a copyright issue. If Aereo doesn't want to, if they just want to provide the service and not charge for it, then I think they have a better case. But ultimately, when you take someone else's property and then you resell it, you owe them for it. You should negotiate for it. That's the requirement of copyright law. And eventually the courts will decide this, and certainly the market will. I mean, as television broadcasting becomes more and more mobile, you know, it used to be ubiquitous broadcasting was a big TV in your living room. Now it's pretty much on every device that you can have. That's going to create a real investment problem, a return on investment problem for Aereo as a business model.
Another new technology that's creating some headaches for broadcasters is the dish hopper, and broadcasters recently lost their attempt to get a preliminary injunction there. That goes forward. It allows basically consumers to skip commercials. Some folks said perhaps broadcasters will have to figure into the retransmission fee request if they lose that case. Can you give us kind of your sense of where you think that's going?
Yeah, I think if it does not violate copyright, then it probably and most certainly does violate contract. And so it then becomes an issue of, you know, the hopper is just aimed at broadcast content, not at cable content, not at their content. And so it's something of real concern to us. It's not for consumer, it's for them, it's for Dish. because they don't allow people to block out their ads, just ours. You know, at the end of the day, I think all of my members, when it comes to doing content deals with Dish, they're gonna have to either, as to past actions, they probably have damages that they can seek. But as to the future, it means that you better have a different number in mind when you want to negotiate retransmission consent with Dish.
Well, I think if I were answering that question, I would say follow the technological trends that are transforming all digital businesses. The first that I would probably observe is the dramatic shift from hardware to software-centric systems. The minute you are able to do more in software rather than proprietary hardware, I think the full creativity of software engineering comes into play. I think that's coming to television. I mean, right now, if you ask the consumer, what's the TV experience in my home, they'll talk about a box that sits on their credenza above their TV. They'll talk about a remote control. They'll talk about the things they don't like about that, to be perfectly candid. But increasingly, the functions that those devices serve are going to be able to be migrated into software rather than proprietary hardware equipment. And I think you'll get faster innovation cycles. So a company like Time Warner or Comcast can innovate the guide overnight, not over the course of a hardware replacement. And I think that when you do that, you start thinking about the other great trend that we've seen ushered in by mobile and the app environment. You'll be able to see little minuets of software that are able to deliver kind of new and intriguing experiences, taking advantage of the premium content we love, but also with the powerful information pipe that we're able to marry with that. And I hope through creative minds that will combine to create really revolutionary new kinds of television watching experiences.
Jeff Bukes of Time Warner recently predicted that most channels in a couple of years will be like HBO, subscription-based. You'll be able to watch almost a la carte.
Well, people say that and they mean...
And he didn't say a la carte. He didn't say a la carte.
I don't think that he would. You know, that means many different things to many different people. What it means, which I think is correct, is that people will have a very anytime, anywhere, any device kind of approach to their television experience. You know, my life as a child of appointment television, when my show was on 7:30 and I'm angry with my mother because we're out shopping and if we don't get back in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to miss it. And I'm not going to, by the way, have any ability to catch up to it or see it again or see it. You know, I can remember that anxiety. You know, when are we getting home to see my show? You know, no child today has that experience, first of all, already. But the new dimension that's going to come into that is the devices, right? More than just the traditional set on the home, but the ability to get to all of these other things, which is why you see people talking about software and IP, meaning if I can begin to speak the language of all computing devices, then I can begin to port my experience to all computing devices. And that will give the consumer dramatically more power to choose time, place, and manner. You know, I love Homeland. I haven't seen Sunday's episode yet. I've heard people talk about it. But I'm picking and choosing when I want to see it. I was busy last night, so I didn't watch it last night. Redskins were on Monday night. Go Skins. But I much preferred to see that than to do this. But tonight, slower night, I might watch it tonight. And that's just what a DVR does for me. But when you start to have the ability to command content more fully, as I think Jeff's talking about, things will look a lot more like that. But what I will say I don't necessarily agree with, just as a TV watcher more than a policy analyst, I think people still love discovery. And I don't mean just the channel. I mean the ability to find surprises. Every month or every year, I giggle a little bit about some show that people are suddenly talking about that I don't think you could have ever imagined choosing. Okay, if you come to me and say, Mike, I want you to choose Honey Boo Boo, or the show with the duck guy, or certain food channel networks, I don't think that if I had to predetermine that was my preference, I would have ever picked them. But the ability to stumble on them, or to hear people talking about them and then let me go into an environment and go kind of dabbling around in that and suddenly find, you know what, I sort of like Honey Boo Boo, and now I'm watching it. I still think that's a huge part of the American television experience, and I think it gets sold short when we get sort of techno-ecstatic talking about anytime, anywhere, now and then. I do still think a lot of Americans love the enjoyment of escapism and passivity and being able to just kind of roam around the TV jungle, finding things that they didn't know were there. I mean, television advertising is a great thing to a degree, but it's always been an odd thing, right? If you're Procter & Gamble, you run an ad, it's very hard for you to know how much the ad worked. You know, you ran it, some creative group says we did a great job, you love the looks of it, then you run out and do consumer surveys to see if people were impacted by it. The internet provides much more real-time answers to those kinds of return on investment questions. And so I think you see advertisers chasing a lot of digital advertising because they learn more about the effectiveness of their messages. But don't count the TV ad as dead. I think the TV ad has to become more entertaining. And when it does, it's mini TV. I mean, I think it's hilarious that the Super Bowl is as much a parade of television advertising experiences as it is a football game. And why? Because that's the day that advertisers go for it all. They put their best creative, their most interesting ideas. What I think is starting to happen is the Super Bowl is expanding into the year. If you really want me to buy Doritos, okay, in July, you're going to have to start showing me stuff against a really fragmented attention span that captures me like you did at the Super Bowl. And maybe you don't have to pay Super Bowl prices to get it on, but I think from an entertainment value, you gotta get my son, whose world is so it's so infected with media, right? How do you get out of that noise floor and get his attention? Humor, other things that make things go viral. You know, you got to get him out of a big cacophonous space.
It sounds like you're still talking about mass media kinds of advertising, though, on television. Do you think, maybe not in 10 years, but 20 years, we'll reach a point where cable operators can serve up individually targeted ads to viewers based on what shows they've been watching, you know, over the course of days and weeks, the way that the internet can sort of track where you've been and serve you targeted ads?
I think the short answer is there'll be no technical limitation of being able to do that. Then it'll just be a behavioral decision whether to do that, and that's the relationship with your consumer that you're comfortable with or not. But think about it now, that's exactly what happens on the web, right? If I go to Amazon right now, or if I go to CNNnews.com or cspan.com, and you do it at exactly the same time, we very well may not see the exact same advertising environment around that. If you go to AOL.com, I guarantee you we will not see the same. And so when you think about where's TV going, back to our first point, software, IP, metadata, the line between TV distribution and internet distribution becomes a lot fuzzier. What you're able to do in the internet model, you certainly will be able to do, even if the cable model is proprietary or private in some degree, the basic mechanisms will still be there. We could know, if it doesn't creep you out, what you're watching at the moment, who's doing the watching. You know, Xbox has an application out that they're experimenting with, which when you walk in the room, its little Kinect system looks at your skeletal frame and knows that it's you and not your son.
You're watching The Communicators on C-SPAN, and this week our focus is on the future of television. We traveled to the CES International Show in Las Vegas and caught up with Troy Wolverton. He's a personal technology columnist for the San Jose Mercury News. We also speak with Phil McKinney, president and CEO of CableLabs, a research development company for the cable industry.
Right now, an HD television is generally defined as one that has 1080p. So what 1080p means is that you've got about 1080 lines of resolution by about 2000, it's called columns of resolution. On a 4K TV, you have double that. So you have double the lines of resolution and you have double the columns of resolution. So you get about 4,000 columns of resolution on a 4K TV. It's actually the resolution, because both sides are double, both the length and the columns, you actually have 4 times the resolution of a regular television. So it's useful on a big screen TV. Most experts will say that it's useful on like a 60-inch and above TV, that below 60 inches you really can't tell the difference. But on a large screen TV, and particularly if you're sitting up close to a large screen TV, you can definitely tell the difference. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a display on the other side of this wall here where they were demonstrating like newspaper text on a screen, and they were showing what it looks like on a 1080p large screen TV and what it looks like on a 4K TV, large screen TV, and you could definitely tell the difference. I mean, it's much sharper and clearer on a 4K TV than it is on a 1080p TV. The problem right now is that 4K TVs are extraordinarily expensive. I mean, Sony came out with its first 4K TVs this past year, and like Daryl was saying, they started off at like $25,000. So they're hoping to get those prices down, and they probably will come down. But you're still probably talking about several times the cost of a regular 1080p television at the same size for a 4K version. The other problem is, as we were kind of talking about in our conversation, there's just no content out there. So Sony is distributing with its 4K TVs a hard drive that has 10 movies on it. Well, I don't know about you, but I watch a lot more than 10 movies in my regular viewing habits. And so you're not going to get any of your latest television shows in 4K. You're almost certainly not going to get the vast majority of the latest movies in 4K. Your streaming video services aren't coming in 4K. There's just nothing out there in 4K right now. And so Sony's trying to help spur that along, and as Daryl talked about, Sony has a lot of the movies that are shot these days are actually shot in 4K. They're just distributed to consumers in 2K in 1080p resolution. So they're hoping to kind of start moving the ball so that you get more of those out in 4K, but it's going to be a big process. And frankly, I have my doubts that they're going to put much out in 4K unless there's a sizable market of consumers out there that are going to watch this content. I mean, why would they go through the process and expense, because there is going to be a considerable expense in distributing this stuff in 4K, if nobody's out there to buy it? I mean, that's kind of what they learned with 3D. I mean, 3D was the thing that they pushed for the last several years. It turned out the consumers weren't terribly interested in 3D. And so there's just, it's kind of this chicken and egg thing. There's not a lot of 3D content out there. Consumers aren't interested, so they're not putting out more 3D content. I mean, 4K is going to be even worse because it's, in the sense that it's only applicable to big-sized televisions, and the market for big-sized televisions, while growing and while significant, it's like 20% now, is still a fraction of the total market.
Is the cable industry a growing industry? Do you see a long future for that industry?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's from the standpoint of CableLabs, keep in mind that our membership is worldwide, not just the US. So if you look in areas like in China, there's estimations that there's going to be $30 billion of CapEx spend in the cable industry alone over the next 5 years. Even here in the US, we're still seeing growth. If you look at the growth rate in data usage from subscribers from cable data services, we're seeing anywhere from 30, 40, 50% CAGR rates on an annual basis, and there's no slowing down. So there's just this insatiable hunger for more capacity, faster speeds. And so the cable industry has a long, long future in being able to be that provider of choice for those services.
When you look 10 years down the road, how are people going to be viewing video, viewing TV? Same way they are today?
No, I think you're seeing that shift already. I mean, the role of the second screen in the living room. And 5 years from now, what's the concept of a channel? Today we think of channel as kind of being this linear, up, down on your remote control. How many of us really watch, linear television in real time? Other than if it's a sports activity, we've kind of gotten into this time shifting model. Now you're seeing this device shifting. I may record it on my DVR in my living room, but I want to watch it on my tablet when I'm out and about. And I think you're going to see just an explosion of the devices and the way consumers want to enjoy the content. They want to enjoy where they're at, when they want it, and they want to see the content they want. They don't want to be tied to, I got to be home at 8 o'clock, or I got to be tied to this specific device. So I think you'll see a shift in what's the concept of subscribing to a channel, and you'll see the shift as far as what device I want to enjoy it on.
You've been watching The Communicators on C-SPAN. View full discussions from this program and more at our website, cspan.org, by clicking on the Series tab and selecting The Communicators. C-SPAN, created by America's cable companies in 1970.